Hi there, folks. Welcome. Oh, a very select group of us this evening. Okay, we'll see how it goes. Yeah, so welcome to session 8. We're something like 2/3 of the way through the course now. And this session is on the inputs. So the structure that I was planning is similar to last week's, in that we'll do our usual things of a little bit of relaxation, check-in, and then an intro. And then I'm thinking that we'll go back into the same groups that we were in last week, although that may not work. Let's see. But basically looking at the same processes we were looking at last week, but in terms of the inputs, what we might want to put in to help make those sessions, those assemblies, go really well. Yeah, let's see how it goes. But for the moment, let's just take a moment to arrive. And again, if you want to move back from the screen into your own space, just for a moment, just letting whatever you've just come from, whatever your day has been so far, just letting that kind of letting it go, I guess, dropping what you can of that, and just coming into the present moment, closing your eyes if you want to, or looking somewhere, looking at something that you find pleasant to look at. Taking a couple of big breaths. Just relaxing into knowing that you're very welcome however you are in this session. There's nothing expected of you other than that you join in and say what you're thinking. And yeah, we're all here together to learn and share our thinking, share our ideas, share our doubts and concerns, and share our inspiration. Whatever is arising for you in the moment is fine. Maybe just feel if there's any tension. If that invitation maybe brings some tension, then notice that. Or if it helps you to relax and be here, then notice that. Notice how your body can contract or relax depending on how whatever invitation you're receiving in the moment is, how it lands with you. Just give your body permission to let go of any tension that it doesn't need to be holding right now. When you feel ready to come back in connection with the screen and the rest of the people, then please do. And we should have some breakouts for checking in, just to say how you're doing, how your day has been, how your week has been. If you have any thoughts about the session this week, or anything else that you want to share, we've got 15 minutes for this, so just share the time roughly equally between you. Okay? Thank you. All right, yeah, they've got another minute. Okay, now I want to start off by going to the overview and sharing my screen. just to show them. To show them where we are. Good. That was Philip's idea. I had a chat with him about what's going on in Dunbar. It sounds really interesting. Have you heard about that at all? No. They've got their local hospital's been struggling for about the last 10, 15 years, and they've decided to close it. And they want to do a community buyout. But there's all kinds of politics and stuff happening. Hello, welcome back. Should put the recording on. Hiya, Brian. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Okay, so I wanted to start by just sharing screen again, and showing you, just quickly revisiting the overview, which you may remember we sent out right at the beginning. So we're here on session 8, right in the middle, really, of this kind of assembly design part. So we looked at structure and flow before the break. We looked at outputs last week. This week's inputs. Then we're looking at deliberation and sense making. So, how do we actually have the kind of conversations that we want to have with people? And how do we, what kind of processes we can use? So that's quite a lot about the processes that we can use to help have different kinds of conversations. And then we're moving on to convergence. And then the last one is next steps. It's what's happened after an assembly happens, and what we can do as our next steps as well. So I just thought it might be quite good to see we're more than halfway through, more like 2/3 through. And yeah, in the middle of this long section about the actual day of the assembly itself. And yes, and the other thing I guess I wanted to say was I've talked to a few people, the people who were kind of saying they might have assemblies over the week. I've managed to speak to most people, partly just to get a little bit of feedback about how the course is going for people, and also to see whether it would be useful to revisit those breakout groups again. But one of the things I really realized talking to people was how different this process has been doing it online, where we're kind of dropping in once a week to a very particular and kind of quite isolated element. And then it's a whole week before the next session, which in some ways gives you a lot of time to integrate maybe what we've been talking about, but which also is so different from when we were running this in person over one weekend. All of this stuff was kind of smushed together. And I think it made the fact that the divisions that we've made are completely artificial, that actually all of this stuff is happening, or the thinking about all of this stuff is kind of happening at the same time. And yeah, obviously it's helpful to think about these different categories, but there's lots and lots of overlap. So I think that's maybe a little bit less clear when we're doing it in this very stretched out fashion. So please do, if there's stuff that I'm saying that doesn't quite add up, or that is confusing, or that if I'm either going over things too fast, or I'm dwelling on something for too long and you want to move on, do just stick your oar in and tell me, because this course is for you, and obviously different people feel different things. So it's always a bit of a compromise. But if you want to give me in real-time feedback, then please feel free to. So moving on to the inputs part. So inputs, from my point of view, are about the stuff that we want to bring in, usually quite early on in the assembly, that is not necessarily right there in the group of local people who we are hoping are going to come along to our assemblies. So it's information and possibly experiences that prime people, that prime that pump of conversation that we want to get into, and that hopefully are going to kind of open up the territory of whatever it is that we're discussing, and open up the range of different opinions. If our assembly is about a kind of like, what do we think on this topic, there's likely to be different opinions, across a spectrum. We want, in this session, we're particularly thinking about like remembering the kind of outputs that we were talking about last week, by which I also want to note that I'm not using the word output in a very kind of specific sense. I'm using a much more general sense of like anything that might come out of the assembly. So when we were talking about the things that we might want to come out of our assembly, like what ideally this assembly is going to achieve, the inputs need to relate to that. And we're not just making this up. We've done loads and loads of outreach as well. That's taken as read. This isn't just me thinking, okay, what am I personally think it's going to be good for these people to know about? I've spent a long time asking people what it is they want to know about. So yeah, it's important to say that this all has to be really, really informed by the local community. Also important to say is that there's no such thing as neutrality in politics and economics. So any subject is going to be full of potential differences of opinion, and so it's important to make sure that if we're exploring an issue, we're trying to bring in a really good range of perspectives for them to draw on. So some of those may be quite business as usual. They might be the points of view of people who hold power in the situation that we're exploring. And some of those might be quite radical and be, alternative takes on like how we could do this. Obviously, when I'm talking about that spectrum, I'm talking about broadly pro-social opinions. I'm not advocating that we should bring in far right speakers just because they have an opinion. And I guess other people might disagree with me on that, but I would say that the range of divergence I'm talking about is within people who are broadly trying to make society better, even if we don't agree with the way that they're trying to do that. Let me see what else have I got here. So the idea would be that early on in the process, there is the input phase where we're getting some new information in the room, and then we're moving on to this kind of deliberative conversations about, well, what do we think about all that then? And what do I think anyway? What as someone who's turned up, maybe I still haven't changed my view, or maybe I have let some new things in. So it's part of that kind of continuum. So I wanted to share a slide about just talking about the different kinds of input.
Would you like me to share it, Eva?
No, it's all right. I've got it. Yeah, so these might be expert testimonies, and I said make sure they're balanced, because that's an incredibly difficult thing to do. We all remember the BBC for a long time trying to do its balanced reporting and bringing in climate deniers when that wasn't really providing balance in terms of the makeup of views across people who knew what they were talking about with the climate. So there is no such thing as balance. So we just have to take our best stab at, okay, here's somebody who we know is influential, who has a strong opinion on this area that we're talking about. We don't agree with them, but we would like them to come and talk. Um, and I think it's also important to say that depending on your um, assembly, you may not be able to get them to come and talk. In the Tory Assembly, we tried to get both the council and the developers um, who had a proposal for St Fiddick's Park that we were looking at, and they wouldn't come. And in some ways, it wasn't surprising that they wouldn't come because the feeling in the community was very high that they were not happy with the plans that were happening. But we attempted to um, express what we thought was their position in a neutral way. So I put on a hat and I read something from their website, and I was tried really hard to make sure that I wasn't making fun of what they were saying or belittling what they were saying, that I was just delivering it in a really straightforward way. Um, it was a bit of a kind of patch, but it felt really important to be clear that they had a perspective, that they had arguments for why what they were doing was good, or what they were proposing was good, and that was allowed to be in the room. But I think our assembly in Tory was weaker because we couldn't persuade them to come, and we probably could have put more work into building relationships with them and finding out what we could have done to make sure that they would come and present without compromising our wish to make it a really fair, level playing field between people with power and people who normally don't have any power. Another balance to expert testimonies are lived experience testimonies. So this is people who are expert because they've lived through something. And that can be really, well, it is really important to have people like that in the room and being given voice. And the same with marginalized voices. And this is one where our own blind spots can play a really big role, because the thing about marginalized voices is that they're marginalized, and quite often we don't see them because because that's how it works. So it's worth putting in quite a lot of work to think about, like, who are we missing out, who does have a view on this, and again, how can we build a relationship with somebody like that? Again, people who are marginalized often won't feel necessarily confident coming and speaking, but there may be other ways that they could share their opinions. Sharing examples of things that have been done elsewhere, and again, this relates to your speculations about what the outcomes or outputs of the assembly might be. So if you're thinking that, I don't know, if your assembly is on food, and you're thinking that maybe people would like to do a community garden or set up some kind of local supply chain, you could bring people in from elsewhere as an example to say, well, this is what we've done in our community, and this is what's worked, and this is what hasn't worked, so that people get a sense of what they would be taking on if they were going to do a project like that. So I guess that's kind of like inspiration. Again, that's maybe for a more practical, more focused, creative thinking assembly, whereas the other ones are maybe more on a kind of like exploring an issue kind of an assembly. And you can use videos. You could use kind of existing videos, or you could ask people to present present remotely, or just create a video that they could then share. And the last one I wanted to show is this kind of experiential exercises. So that's like giving people an experience in the moment, in the room, that they won't have had before. We've often used visualizations to get people to think through kind of imaginary scenarios that they might not have thought through, or they might not have just had the time to think through before. And although, there are some people who really, really hate those kinds of things, most people can use them, even if they don't like. Some people love it, and they've got like videos playing it in their heads. seeing everything. Most people are somewhere on a spectrum between those things. But if you give people the option of like just sitting and taking some notes or opting out entirely, if they really don't want to, as long as they're being quiet, stuff like that, that would give people an actual experience of something that and time to think through something that they haven't had experience of, can be really useful. And I'm super interested in that category of things like theatre of the theatre of the oppressed, or using artwork. It's not something I've done a huge amount of. It is something that I think is really important because I think it helps people to think differently about things, to think freshly about things. And it also challenges our sense of what democracy looks like. Because at the moment, when we think of democracy, we think of a bunch of people sitting in a room, normally facing one another, disagreeing vehemently, and normally wearing suits. Um, and and I think that power with democracy probably looks really different to that. Um, and we're inventing this. We're part of a movement and a wave of people who are looking at democracy and going, does it have to be like this? Because it doesn't seem to be making good decisions, and nobody of any kind of with any sense wants to get involved in it. So there must be something wrong here. What needs to change is up for grabs at the moment, and for me, that kind of creative experiential thing is part of it. It's not the whole of it, but I think it's important that we are experimenting with how it can be different. Um, Let me get back to my notes. Um, yeah. So again, other things that that would are good to consider around your inputs is, and this is something we are going to look at more later on in the session in the breakouts. It's like which pathway are they addressing? A particular pathway. It could be useful to think, oh right, it would be really good to have somebody who or some input around pathway one. You know, what can this rather pathway two? What can this community just go out and do for itself? Or it could be that you want to really focus on pathway two, like we know that we're going to have to work with people in positions of power here. So what are the various different inputs that are kind of around being really impactful around pathway two, working with people with in existing power holding roles? So it'll, they'll also depend on the focus of your assembly. If you're addressing a local question or a debate, will be different from if you're exploring a proposal that's been made, or if you're trying to open up creative possibilities for the future. Those are all quite kind of different. Those kinds of assemblies have quite different feels, and you'll be putting different kind of inputs in. Philip, do you have a playbook of such experiential exercises to draw from? No. What we've got a handbook. This bloody handbook that I've been kind of shilly-shallying about. Should I just give it to people now, or do we wait till the end? And it's the reason that we're nervous about it. In fact, Justin is way more nervous about this. I can say this when he's not here. He's way more nervous about sharing it than I am. It is deliberately a work in progress. And there is stuff in that that is currently out of date and needs to be rewritten. But that's always going to be the case because we're constantly learning how to do this and changing our minds or adding bits. And so I need to talk to him because I need to get his permission. And I forgot to ask him when I spoke to him this evening. But I would really like to share the handbook with you, just in general, because it basically takes you through this whole course, but in a oneer. So you can go back and see what we've talked about in previous sessions and some stuff that we haven't talked about because we didn't have time to. You can see what's coming up, and which might then mean that you can come to sessions with more questions. And I think that playbook of experiential exercises, yeah, we do have a little bit. I'm sure there's more that we could add. So sorry, that was a little bit of an aside. So yeah, the inputs are important because the more transparent and accessible and relevant what we do in the assembly is, and the kind of the quality of the things that we bring into the assembly, it all adds legitimacy to what we're doing. It all means that people can't turn around and say, well, that was just you and your friend saying something, or well, you never included people who disagreed with you. At this stage, obviously, assemblies don't have very much real power. But again, this process of being part of this wave of questioning how democracy happens means that we are hoping that they will become more powerful, that they'll become more influential and potentially, yeah, get together. We've said this lots of times. I got another slide just quickly to share on questions that can be useful to ask yourself around what I've just said, with inputs. So yeah, is the range of opinion, maybe a range of an opinion is maybe a better way to say that. So have we got differing points of view? Have we got some points of view being represented that maybe we don't agree with? And are our blind spots meaning that we're maybe missing key inputs? So yeah, good to think about that. Does the input support people to move into a zone where they can think more freely and stimulate discussion and deliberation? And that's really important. And it's a really, really difficult question to answer. For me, it's one of the big reasons that I want to do assemblies. And it's a question that I haven't managed to answer satisfactorily very often. But it's like, how do we get people out of all the assumptions that we make about our own powerlessness, about the inevitability of whatever it is that we're discussing, about the kind of cultural straitjacket that we often find ourselves in, where doing things differently is scary or embarrassing or just unthinkable. How do we move people out of that and into a place where we can really be thinking freely together? This is a shared inquiry between us and other people who are running assemblies. But I think it's really good to think about that, to have that feeling of wanting that for people who come along to the assembly, even if we don't have a kind of a magic wand where we can guarantee it. So is there, in the input, are there people who are going to be inspiring, who are going to, and challenging in how they're bringing things so that it really gets people into this kind of freed up place? Are we swamping people with too much new information? A really important point, particularly if we're looking at something quite complex. And also the converse. Are we not giving people enough or not enough time to think it through? So again, really trying to sort of wrestle with that balance is important when we're thinking about inputs. And the range of formats, like so one of the reasons why I like the idea of bringing more theatre in, or more just gameplay or artwork or visualizations, is because for a lot of people, sitting and talking or listening to people or reading things is not how they learn. It's not how they process. It is how we feel we're supposed to, but loads of us know that that's not how we learn best. So really trying to think about, like, is there a way we can do this which isn't just people sitting and listening? Are there things that we can where we can shake things up a bit or give people a different point of view to look from? And then this kind of another core question is like, what does balance look like in power with democracy? So genuine alternative views that help to open up people's minds, and not going for a balanced opinion or what, or I guess just questioning that sense of what is balance. because it's going to be different in every single context. But just to know that it's not necessarily going to look the same as we expect it to. Right, and get out of that slide. Back to my notes. Yeah. So key to all this is how we then work with it. And that's for next week. So be aware that we're touching into something that's important and specific, but that doesn't work on its own or in a vacuum, and that we'll need to kind of suspend a little bit of thinking until next week. So the next thing that I wanted to do was give you a little bit of time just to think about a situation for yourself. And it's to do with that thing about taking a step beyond what you thought was possible, thinking something new for the first time. And when that's happened for you, and I wanted to give you a wee example of when one time that it's happened for me. And it was when I read Rob Hopkins' article in Permaculture News about 25 years ago, about his experiments in Kinsale, which were the beginning of the transition movement, this idea that we could look at food and transport and housing in our own community. And I had been busily for quite a while trying to get a kind of low carbon group going in my community with basically no luck. I'd tried to convene a couple of meetings. I'd had quite a lot of climate deniers coming in and joining in, but I had no interest at all from people in the community. And suddenly I got this new model, this other way of doing things that felt really positive. It felt really exciting. It felt like, wow, this is a way to make this seem like a good thing for our community anyway. And we're saving carbon. We're reducing our carbon footprint. Um, and suddenly this kind of world of, oh wow, this is a really different way of doing things opened up for me. So what the kind of kernel of that is was that I was shown a new model, a different way of organizing thinking and taking action around something that was important to me. So when we're thinking about inputs, when I'm thinking about inputs, one of the things I could be thinking is, are there new models out there? Because I know that for me, that really worked in terms of opening up um, uh, my thinking and my inspiration. So I wanted to give you like 2 minutes quiet just to think for yourself about something, and it may be very, very different to my experience, but just something that shifted your thinking into a different gear. And then we can share those when we're doing the breakout exercise. So I'll give you 2 minutes in quiet. Okay. Hopefully that was enough time to think of something. It's really just to kind of feed the conversation in the breakouts more. So we are 11, 10 people really, because Johanna and I probably won't join a breakout. And there are at least 4 people who shared possible assemblies from last time. I wonder what we should do. Of those of you who shared assemblies last time, is there anyone who'd be keen to work on inputs in a breakout for this session? Somebody has to say yes. Jay, thank you. And Chelsea. So if we did you'd have 5 people in each. So we could do that, or what? We could have one more person.
Did Brian raise?
But
Yeah.
Brian, you saying you would? Yeah. Okay. Let's go for 3, and we'll spread people out between those 3 groups. So what I was hoping for with this this breakout was that you maybe describe your assembly briefly to the people. So Johanna, if you can be setting up the breakouts around those people and spreading people around. So just quickly give a recap on what assembly you're thinking of, and some of the things that you talked about around outputs last time. And then I've got a new Jamboard, which puts all the 4 pathways together, and it asks what kind of inputs energize each of the pathways. And this is in relation to the particular assembly that you're talking about. You don't have to put post-its in all of the boxes, but just use it as you want to as is most helpful for you to think about the kind of inputs, remembering that this is yes, I will put, oh, thank you, you're going to put the Jamboard link in. Thank you very much. Yeah, remembering that this is something of an artificial situation. So you may need to, obviously we're needing to kind of suspend the fact that this is not a real assembly process, even if we may be talking about a real assembly that could happen. Are there any questions, or does that make sense to everybody? Yeah, you've got the Jamboard link, you've got the breakouts, and sorry, was that somebody?
So we're brainstorming about inputs.
Yes. Yeah, possible inputs in as many of the pathways that kind of might push people or inform people around particular pathways. And you may want to go, well, actually, this input isn't about any of the pathways. It's just something that feels really important to talk about in the context of this assembly. That's fine. Yeah, the framework may or may not work for you. If it doesn't work for you, make your own framework, or make one that works better. Okay, so we'll be about 20 minutes in these.
Do we want to take a break first, Eva?
Well, I was going to take the break after.
Okay.
Yeah, is that all right?
Yeah.
Whew. Jane was having Wi-Fi issues. In fact, we could just turn that back off, because I think we'd just take a 5-minute break to go first. Yeah, someone's got a break. Yes. Thank you very much.
That's okay. Do it, and Angela. So yeah, we started off kind of talking a bit about inputs, and we kind of did stray into a bit more of a conversation about the political system and representation, as these things do. But I guess we're kind of talking about having people willing to get involved in community action in the area, and that might be, it might just start off with one person who's going around and talking to people that then energizes other people to get involved. But I think there's a recognition that if you have a couple of people who are always the ones that are doing this kind of stuff, then at some point those people are going to reach burnout. So you need to kind of try and bring more people in to keep that momentum going and to take some of the pressure off. So there's a bit of conversation about that. And then kind of making people aware of the potential and the options for community action. I mean, I was, just as the room closed, I was sharing about my reflection to the question that you'd asked, Eva, about a sort of pivotal moment, if you like, where something had kind of changed. And that, for me, there was a little bit time where, or well, not a little bit time, but for a long time I didn't really know about community councils and what they did and what they do. And I come from quite a politically aware family, but it wasn't something like that. The structure of our system wasn't something that we talked about. We talked about politics in terms of the parties and voting and all that kind of stuff, but we didn't really talk about that really local level of potential to influence decision making. So for me, when I discovered the community councils, it was like, oh right, okay, so I can go to these people and talk to them. And I sat in a couple of meetings, which I think the community council were like, oh, we've got a member of the public here. Because it does happen, but not as often as potentially it could. And I think part of that is just because time capacity and all of that kind of thing, especially if you're in a more deprived area. But part of it is, I think, just a lack of awareness on what the mechanisms are that people have to get involved in local decision making. So there was a bit about that. And then we were kind of thinking about people coming together around issues that can be a bit of a focal point that kind of energizes people. And then having that platform that enables people to come together and take action. Brian was talking about the Scotland Decides website that is sort of coming into fruition as a platform for people to raise issues that they would like to campaign on or develop conversations around. So yeah, and then as I said, a lot of our conversation kind of went into the structures that we're working within just now and structures that exist in other places, what we would like to change. So I'll leave it there and let others kind of come in.
Yeah, that's interesting because it sounds like, talking about that, so part of what you were talking about was the kinds of inputs that just raise awareness of what's already there, of pathways, of ways of taking action that already exist that people maybe don't know about. So and letting people that feels like more of a kind of like the things that you've described feel more like a kind of creative thinking smorgasbord of, these are the things that you've said that are important. These are a range of different ways that you could, or people have, made interventions around these kinds of things. What is it that this group of people here think needs to happen or would like to try and make happen? So it's that kind of feeding in. But Brian?
Yeah, well, during that conversation, I had the thought that even, because I suspect that the street assembly that I want to have is probably not going to have issues that are going to bring people together. But if the only outcome is that they know about people's assemblies and the potential for bringing them together, when an issue does arise, that it's not starting from a blank sheet, that there's something there for them. And I think, knowing that the community council are there to help, and that's what they're supposed to be there for. Even knowing that that's running is a good thing to know, if you're starting off from a blank sheet.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Yeah, I mean, I feel like community councils are they're a real mixed bag, aren't they? I think some of them are quite energetic and actually quite effective, and a lot of them, as far as I know, are quite hidebound, do the absolute minimum and have quite an unthought through decision-making process and quite a hierarchical structure. And it frustrates me because I think it is part of our system. It's part of the political system that is supposed to be available for just anybody to step into and use. And yet it's so there's often a lot of local power politics being played out in miniature in them, and it can be very difficult to get involved as a new person. Some of them it's certainly in mine, when I first went along, it was super intimidating to speak as a member of the public, and we weren't given very much option to do that. So I think giving people a different experience of how community meetings can be is, like you're saying, Brian, just that, having a different experience of collective power, of collective decision making, whatever it is, could be the main outcome of your assembly, is folk know there's other ways to do things.
There is work underway to try and beef up the community councils, but it's probably going to give them more responsibility, so it might be counterproductive.
I guess it depends. I mean, in some ways, if the stakes are higher, then maybe people will care more and fight for fairer, more transparent processes within them. Because at the moment, it's really easy just to go, "Oh, well, that's a toxic place."
I'm a
They
community
don't have
councillor,
any
by the
power.
way.
Yeah, I'm
So
sure
that
yours
does
is
what is
great.
more done. It is a good one, actually. Not because of the effort I put in, but it is quite a good one.
Yeah. Well, I know that they really vary, and that they can be really effective.
But I've not known any one of them to actually consult the people. I've never known that. This is where I think people's assemblies should become invaluable.
Yes, actually, our one did do quite a lot of that, and the thing is that if it's not an assembly process, if it's just standing outside the supermarket with a clipboard, then you just get people's knee-jerk reactions. So you get lots and lots and lots of different opinions, and it's impossible to really know what to do because people think different things. That's what we find out when we consulted. If you don't have a process where people can actually talk to each other and listen to each other and come to some kind of shared understanding of what's going on, then consultation is pretty pointless, because we're not atomized individuals. We're a collective species, and that's what makes sense to operate. Lindsay.
No, I was just going to say, I seem to have I don't quite know how it happened, but seem to be the vice convener in our village community council. And I genuinely actually really don't know how that happened. Because Barbara, I agree with you, until probably about 7 or 8 years ago, I didn't really know community councils existed or what their function was or anything. And then because we started the Climate Action Network in the village, the convener said, "Oh, and bless him, he actually was, our community council was made up of 8 over a certain age gentlemen, and but they have been hats off to them. They've been so welcoming to myself and Heather from the Climate Action Network, and we have come in with quite different viewpoints probably, and they've been good about that. But so it's been about a year or so, and I've just kind of eased my way into it. Got quite a lot of other commitments as well, but I am now getting together want to do some community engagement, because I don't feel like we speak with the community enough and hear their views, and I don't think half the community still knows that there is a community council in the village. And yeah, but actually this has made me reflect that about how we give, because it is quite intimidating, people walking into meetings. I mean, I'm a loudmouth. I'm quite happy to walk into anywhere I'm there, and in case you hadn't all noticed. But yeah, I feel like yeah, that's made me really think about how do we bring in anyone and everyone. And I don't know, I was just thinking it'd be quite nice to have like post-it notes at the door where people could just write if they don't want to speak, they could just write their thought down or their question down for the end. It also might streamline the chat on potholes, which is considerable. And towards the end of the evening, I slightly lose the will to live. But yeah, so thank you for letting me reflect on that, and apologies for being so massively late. The rabbits escaped the hutch. I've been in the garden with rabbit food, just don't ask. So my husband's out at a meeting, and yeah, we have 2 Angora bunny rabbits. They're amazing. They're like this size, they're massively fluffy, and they are wee Houdinis. Anyway, I'll let you all carry on now, but apologies.
That's
for
great.
my lateness.
Yeah, thanks, Lindsay. And yeah, I mean, some of what you're talking about was more the kind of like for next week, the kind of deliberation part.
Okay.
Like, how do you get people to engage with the material?
Yeah.
But it's also like, it's also the input bit for me is also about like raising people's level of ambition, because I think very often it's potholes and dog shit. Is like
Yes.
that's where people go to first, because it immediately affects their lives, and it's all they think that they could possibly hope to affect. And I think that's where the inputs can be like, more inspirational. You can bring somebody in who's done something really exciting in their community that has impacted on people's quality of life, but
Yeah.
it's raising people's sense of ambition. I think
our village has been quite affected by flooding the last October. And so that's been massive on our agenda as well. And it's how to get the various components, the people who actually can do anything about that, people who will clear the drains so that when surface water runs really fast. We also have, because we're a seaside town, if you have an incoming tide and the flood coming, anyway, I won't go into it all, but it's there. So there is, on top of the potholes and the dog poo, there is there's other stuff going on. But I completely agree. It's how do you raise people's expectations? Like, I would like to bring in local place planning, and that's my big sort of goal, is if we can get a community engagement a bit higher, so that then we can go around a local place plan, because then we can really start to eke out what people would like from their village, and what we have and what we don't have, and blah 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 blah.
Yeah. So that's one of the things that we were talking about, is like, what things that can help people think differently. So providing an alternative model or a new model for people to organize their thinking around is one of the inputs that you can bring that help people to think new things, rather than the same old things that they tend to think frustratedly because nothing ever changes. Anyone else? Another? Yeah, Jay.
I find in the breakout, I find it's always very valuable to have the chance to try and articulate what the hell I am doing, or what our group is doing, in a concise way. So that's always a valuable thing to do, and very nice to have people's responses to that. One thing that I have realized is, at the moment, we've started, I'm not sure if we're doing anything like an assembly, but we're giving presentations to people in this building about assemblies and democracy and what have you, by showing videos. And one thing I mean, we've done 2 or 3 of these. I realized there's a difference between, let's say, yours truly standing up in front of people and spouting, or the video presenting stuff to people. And in terms of the thing we were doing slightly before the breakout of actually thinking about something new, I was very taken by a TED talk given by the guy that runs Free Shakespeare in New York Central Park, I think it is. And he made the very good point that the dynamic between him standing on a stage speaking to an audience, where he sort of is the fount of all knowledge, and the simple change for him on the stage to turn 90 degrees to another actor and exchange views between 2 actors, the response of the audience is quite different. You're watching 2 people who've got opinions, who are debating in the presence of an audience. And I found that very valuable, in that trying to get away from one person pontificating to encouraging a group of people to deliberate amongst themselves, and, well, maybe stimulated by seeing 1 or 2 people deliberating in a play setting. So I thought that was pretty useful.
Yeah, it's a really interesting idea. I mean, there's a technique that you can use with groups where which you would use in kind of particular situations, called fishbowl. Some of you may have come across it, where you set up a sort of small inner circle of people, maybe sort of 6 or 7 chairs, not many. You leave one of them empty, and the others are filled by specific people who are having a conversation about a particular topic that is of interest to the whole group, but where some people maybe have lived experience of a particular situation and other people don't. So you're watching this conversation and you're not necessarily participating in it, but the one seat is for somebody who is for anybody to come in and sit and make a point and then move out. So it's a short life seat that you can sit in for a while, and then you move out, and then somebody else moves into it. So it keeps a kind of little semi-permeable membrane with the rest of the group. And I think there's lots of different ways that you can do that, but I hadn't thought of using it to kind of model a deliberative process where you're really showing people, not experientially in the first place, but kind of like at one remove, showing people really listening to one another and kind of leaning into the differences between them and trying to find out what's underneath the the different points of view, which is exactly what we're talking about next week. This sort of deliberation is like, how do we move beyond just like simple disagreement into really trying to understand more deeply what this conversation is actually about that we're having. So yeah, nice possible take on inputs to show somebody something rather than tell a group of people something. I like that. Any other thoughts on that, or should we try and find someone else with an assembly? I don't know. Do we do all the groups? Has anybody not spoken about their?
I guess that would be me. I like JC's what you said there, the idea about instead of presenting information like a monologue, present it like a dialogue. And it reminded me of a debating technique my daughter in her debate club uses. Like a lot of times they'll have to argue a point they don't even believe in. So they divide into teams. They do exactly that. They do this fun exercise regularly where they're given a topic and the teacher will sometimes purposely put them in the group that they disagree with, that she knows, like, oh, they're not going to like that point of view. So she puts them in there and then they have to argue their way out of it. So that's also maybe an interesting tool for those kinds of assemblies, because forces people to have another point of view.
Mm.
Good exercise.
Mm.
Yeah, so I'll collect that. I'm not sure. We didn't really get around to the board at all. We didn't open up the board at all. I think I had a really good input, a really a good idea. Philip said, invite an expert speaker, specifically about climate change and how the food will impact our food systems. So I think that would be essential, besides just us presenting that information, which we have done before, but to have it in that context from an expert, an outside expert, would be really important. But then I'm not sure. Then we also got into the area of it being more about a systemic change. And I'm not even sure if what I was going to do assembly on, if it would even work or not. So I'm not even sure anymore on that. So
can I ask what it was? What your idea has been?
it was about the food security in our region. How do we have food security in our region?
Mm-hmm. Okay. I mean, the first thing that I think about in terms of expert speakers is that there's a range of views on that. You know, a supermarket boss would have a very different answer to that question than maybe a kind of local producer. And that's what I was meaning about this kind of spectrum of views. It's like, if we're talking about food security and we're wanting people to really kind of expand their idea of, or they're just that understanding of the issue, then having 2 or 3 speakers that have got different points of view can be a really good way of starting, or having 2 or 3 different conversations between 2 people, because I think people can speak it out quite easily. But three speakers wouldn't necessarily be too much for people. And having somebody speak who's kind of representing business as usual, or minor tweaks to business as usual, without making them a kind of stooge, I think it can be really useful to present the best case scenario for not making very much change. Because that's what most of us start with, is like, well, this is what we've got. And if we don't introduce that as part of the picture, then it could be really easy to kind of write off anything that comes out of that assembly as well. Well, they didn't think about what we've already got and what we're already doing. So having that kind of presented, I think can be quite important in terms of being able to really put everything around this subject out on the table and then be able to talk about it. How does that land with you? Is that like straightforward and obvious and that's what you were thinking anyway?
No, because we haven't learned about the process really of the assembly yet. I was just thinking in terms of inputs, but I mean, yes, on my own, I was thinking of like the farmers in the region. We are in contact with a lot of food producers in our area. We have tons. And growers, local growers, just like they grow their own food in their garden kind of thing. People who can't afford to shop from like our online farmers market that we have, or who benefit from food that we give away already, just trying to represent the spectrum of people there. I was thinking along those lines. Yeah. I was not thinking about inviting the supermarkets. But I could invite someone from co-op, because they do donate a lot to our food pantries. So that's very interesting. Also, co-op is like supportive of a lot of community organizations. So having someone like them around, and also they collect soft plastics, you know, they support woodcraft folk. Yeah, they do a ton of good stuff. So
yeah, and it could be really interesting for them to be part of an assembly, because if you're trying to push the boundaries a little bit and talk about, you know, the future, very often in big organizations like that, you don't really have very much time to have those kind of thought processes. And if this is a you know, an organization that actually is contributing quite a lot to the local scene, then it, you know, might be helpful having them think through. Just 2 seconds, I just have to shout at my dad. I've never had to do that before in a Zoom meeting. Hello at my dad, I'm in a meeting. Very good. Yeah, so, and I had another question, which was, so what, by the end of the conversation that you had in the breakout room, made you feel like, oh, maybe I shouldn't do this at all? What was feeling insoluble, or
I guess because we got to the point that it's bigger than just our local food system. It's about society, because we're talking about the affordability of food and how the local online market is great for those that can afford it. So yeah, just the fact that you have people that can't afford it with a changing environment, that's going to get even worse. And you know,
yeah, so it's super complex. There's
Yeah.
layers and layers and layers, and you know, food is one of those subjects that you can go on forever.
Yeah,
So,
but so I was thinking about, well, maybe it's not an assembly, that maybe we just break it apart and it is like actually inviting expert speakers and providing that information and having the workshops, you know, continuing the community garden and supporting the pantries and all the work we already do. I mean, we're already doing all that work, I guess, but yeah. See, I just feel like, well, what's the point of the assembly? I don't know. The point is to try to get other people to take it on. Like, that's the point. Like, you know, like our organization, we don't want to be the only ones doing the work, you know, for champion the food in the region, you know, like, yeah.
Did you have a point, Philip?
Well, yeah, really just to
Response.
not to throw out everything because it's too complex, but really just to be, because obviously, creating a resilient local food system is a huge challenge. But I think it's just a question of being realistic in what outputs you can expect from one assembly. So, but I think it could still be a useful part of the process.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm really happy, Chelsea, and we've been in touch, and it would be really good to have a chat. But I'm really happy to help you think through really specifically how to make something like that both feel like meaningful and manageable. You can't take on the entire food system as a tiny organization in one assembly. That's not possible. But also, you could make a meaningful contribution to a conversation, ongoing conversation in your community, and potentially contribute to a wider conversation across the whole country, because you're not the only people thinking about that. There are, you know, there are other people, there's organizations like Nourish, and knowing, you know, it's amazing knowing that there's a little group in a little community somewhere trying their best to do something. It's so inspiring for other people, and you never think about it at the time. But when someone hears about that and goes, "Oh wow, that's really good! God, they're doing that there," it actually
Just given me an
it has an
idea there.
impact.
You've just given me an idea there, because I just went to a consultation on the National Good Food Plan, which is now closed for contributions, but was really interesting to be in a room full of people that were all thinking, you know, from people in pantries to people in social enterprise that represent all the big food producers in Scotland. It was very interesting to have everybody's perspective and where they were coming from, and to feel the tension of people who did not want the changes that are coming. So yeah, maybe that's a thing to do as well, to maybe have a community discussion about that national food plan when it's finally decided and comes out.
Great. There you go. That's a great thought. You got some other responses. Lindsay, I think you're first. You're muted.
Oh dear, I'm not doing well. Chelsea, I was just wondering, whereabouts are you?
Stirlingshire, West Stirlingshire.
It's just because there are some sustainable food partnerships going on around the country, and I just wondered if, I'm trying to think. I know there's one in Aberdeen, and I know there's one. I was just wondering if there was one in your area. Does anyone else know?
We are kind of that.
You are kind of. You are kind of. Okay.
We know everyone, and we're we hold the whole. Oh, we link all the producers together.
Yeah. Okay, so you are the Sustainable Food Partnership. I'm still getting working out my food zones around Scotland, to be honest.
It's tough. And I also work for the Fourth Environment League. I'm on the food team and there as well. So I also have contacts further to the east. Yeah.
Yeah. So you are well and truly it. Okay, in that case, I will be quiet now.
Thank you.
Okay. Sarah?
Speak only because I had this in a conversation earlier, was that a colleague's sister was going into hospitals and understanding how, like, say, Moorfields Eye Hospital, the number of their staff that are on going to food banks and stuff like that. What opportunities are there to kind of reach out to union workers and other groups that you can get more data on you know, the level of food poverty that's happening in the community, because as you know, a lot of it is hidden. But say Moorfields weren't going to set up a community kitchen because that's outside of the realm of what they would want to do or work on. But then the question is, well, how can your technicians actually operate this machinery effectively? Like, you know, what are the risks involved? So just because that kind of came up in a conversation earlier, are there other links that you can have to other unions that aren't necessarily thinking about food but are experiencing food poverty, or their members are?
Thank you. I have not thought about unions. I think it's because we're in a rural area. But that's something to look at. We definitely have contacts in the NHS Forth Valley, as well as the way we've approached it is with trying to give people who can't afford food dignity. So we don't actually know. We do actually. Sometimes we do because they come directly to us, but other people we don't know who's getting it because we've contacted the churches in the area.
Yeah.
And the school also, you can go, the schools know who's suffering in our area.
Yeah.
So we donate our food to like we have preachers that come and pick it up, and then they know who gets it, or we give it to the school and they know. So
there must be a huge body of people who aren't sort of captured in that system or that net yet, just because a lot of things around the kind of cost of living crisis has only happened in a few years. So people that were very much not in that realm are now needing support and access, and maybe aren't accessing it.
We've tried to collect the information in surveys whenever we have events.
Yeah.
Besides contacting
that people know to find you. Yeah.
Yes, thank you, Sarah. Should we have a last quick point from Barbara, and because we need to close?
Yeah, just very quickly, just kind of picking up on a couple of things that other people have said and maybe building on it a little bit. So in terms of looking at partnerships, first of all, Philip, absolutely, you're not going to solve everything. So it's like kind of looking at what you can do, but also building that up. So in Edinburgh, there was a group that started a growing project in Granton Walled Garden, and one of the things that they grew was wheat, which then led to a community bakery, which operates out of Hilton Community Health Project, and it's kind of pay what you can for the bread. And not all of the wheat comes from the community garden, because it doesn't produce enough, but they source wheat from other kind of local organic sources. But that project has now developed to the point where there's now another, I don't know if it's the same group or another group that's kind of come off from that, where they've actually taken on land just outside of Edinburgh, that side of the city, and they've kind of got a community farm going, and they're bringing people from Granton to the community farm to kind of learn about that food growing process, and kind of sharing that food around the community. And it's yes, we kind of got a pay what you can pantry, where people pay, or I think people pay £3 a week that are local to become members of the pantry, and then they can just go in and get a bag of shopping, and that's but so I think just looking at other examples of different models, and I do have a couple of contacts that I can pass on if you'd be interested, if you're not already in contact with these groups, because it is a huge issue. But that was all.
Yeah, no, that sounds fantastic, Barbara. Maybe we could go on like field trips. That sounds really good. Yeah.
Yeah, or invite speakers, and not so much like I'll explain to you how the food system is, but this is what we did in our community. This is our project. That's it's exciting, and that could be replicated or copied or somehow inspire folk locally to where you are. So it's that kind of. Yeah. So we've really kind of dug into a whole range of different types of input that will give people different opportunities to open up ideas, open up experiences, get inspired, think differently, feel differently. And hopefully that's been a helpful kind of overview. Next week,
thank you.
we're looking at, yes, and from me too, thank you very much, and goodbye, and see you hopefully next week for deliberation. Ta-ra.
Good night.